Hi there. I'm Davina. My parents gave our family estate to my sister, without telling me. They signed the papers, planned the renovations, even called it a fresh start. I was never even in the room. But that wasn't the worst part. Years before, they'd quietly erased my name from everything, while I was still paying the bills, preserving the house, protecting the legacy my grandfather left behind. They thought I'd never find out, but they forgot about the hidden trust. What else did they hide from me? And how far were they willing to go? The house smelled like rosemary lamb and lemon polish, my mother's signature scent for family dinners. I stepped into the foyer of the estate I once called home, expecting nothing more than a lukewarm evening of polite conversation and awkward small talk. Instead, I walked into a performance, and I was the only one who didn't know the script. Davina, my mother smiled, setting her wine glass down. You made it. Of course I made it. I always made it. Rain or shine, New York deadlines or not, I never miss these dinners. My sister Sabrina, perched confidently at the far end of the table, barely looked up from her phone. Her husband Martin, predictably overdressed in his usual off-duty CEO getup, gave me a nod like he was greeting an employee. Dinner carried on under the weight of rehearsed pleasantries. The roast was overcooked, the tension underdone. I picked at my food, catching Sabrina's smug glances and Martin's forced chuckles. He loved to hear himself talk, mostly about real estate trends and generational wealth. Ironic. Then Dad cleared his throat and the room shifted. We've made a decision, he said, laying his fork down with ceremonial precision. It's time we plan for the future of this place. I glanced around, confused. What do you mean? My mother folded her hands like she was praying. We're transferring ownership of the estate. Sabrina and Martin will be the new title holders. I blinked, just like that. No discussion, no heads up, no mention of me. Not even a fake nod of inclusion. I wasn't just excluded, I was erased. They're planning to start a family, Dad continued. This home deserves to be filled with life again. And I guess I didn't count as life. Sabrina offered a tight smile, the kind you give someone you're firing. We're honored to carry on the Harrington legacy. Martin topped off his wine. He was already leaning back in Grandfather Emery's chair like he owned the damn place. That chair used to mean something. Emery used to sit there with his whiskey and tell me stories about the property's origins, how history had weight, how legacy should be protected, not pawned. Now that chair held a man who once suggested turning the library into a yoga studio. I forced a smile, trying to swallow the bitterness burning up my throat. Well, I said, my voice steady but hollow, congratulations. I stood slowly, my limbs heavy. I've got an early meeting. I should go. No one stopped me. No one even looked surprised. Outside, the October wind clawed at my coat as I walked to my car. The estate stood behind me, lit up like a stage set. A house full of family, yet somehow I'd never felt more like a stranger. As I gripped the steering wheel, one thought rang louder than the rest. They've already made their choice. But they forgot one thing. I was never out of the game. Sleep didn't come easy. My mind had looped that dinner scene all night, replaying the smug smiles, the calculated silence. When the morning sun slipped through my condo blinds, it didn't feel like a new day. It felt like a warning shot. Still in pajamas, I shuffled into the kitchen and started my usual ritual. Grind the beans, fill the kettle, pretend I wasn't unraveling inside. Then, ding! A real estate alert lit up my phone. I frowned. I'd set that watch years ago for anything linked to the estate's address. I almost didn't click, but I did. The screen loaded slowly. When the file opened, I nearly dropped my mug. Sabrina and Martin had filed paperwork using the estate as collateral for a personal loan, $500,000. Their names were listed under intended transferees. Intended, as in, not yet actual owners. But they were already betting the house. Heart pounding, I yanked open my laptop and pulled up the Fayette County Property Database. There it was, a pending lien application, filed last Thursday, 3 days before the dinner. This wasn't spontaneous, it was orchestrated. My name? Absent. Not even a footnote. I sank into the chair, breathing shallowly. Did they think I'd never check? That I was too naive? Too docile? I opened my file cabinet, pulling out a worn folder marked Emery Trust. My grandfather's handwriting still sat bold across the front. He had set up a private trust when I turned 25. Not flashy, but powerful, quiet and binding. I'd been using it for years to cover estate repairs, taxes, insurance, all behind the scenes, all to keep the house intact. I'd never bragged, never held it over anyone. I did it because I believed in preserving something that mattered, and now they were trying to mortgage the very bones of it for kitchen upgrades and God knows what else. I whispered, "Unbelievable." I wasn't angry. I was past angry. This wasn't about property. It was about being erased. I printed every document, highlighted every lie. Then I called Walter Jenkins. He picked up on the second ring, voice rough like he hadn't had coffee yet. "It's Davina," I said. "They've made their move." He didn't even ask who they were. There was a pause. Then he muttered, "It's time we talk." I hung up, then pulled an old photo off the wall. Me and Emery beneath the oak tree he planted in 1962. My hand lingered on the frame. "You trusted me with this," I whispered. "I won't let them bury what you built." By the time I met Walter at the cafe, the midday heat had lifted, replaced by a chill that crept in through the windows. We chose a corner table, away from curious ears. He opened the trust file without small talk, scanning page after page with tired eyes. When I explained about the mortgage lien, he didn't flinch, just tapped the paper with his pen. "Premature, illegal, unless they're banking on no one challenging them." I stirred my coffee, letting the silence stretch. "They are." Back home, I couldn't sit still. I pulled out my laptop and started combing through years of documents, PDFs, emails, cloud folders tied to the estate. That's when I found it. Buried in a 2018 archive, a chain titled Estate Planning, Internal Only. I clicked it open. It was a conversation between my parents, Sabrina, and a real estate attorney. At first, it was routine, zoning questions, probate concerns. Then a line from Sabrina made my fingers go cold. "Davina's priorities don't align with long-term family legacy. We should consider excluding her from future revisions for simplicity." There it was, cold, efficient, clean. No room for discussion, no questioning my intentions, just a quiet removal, years before any papers were drawn up. I sat back, numb. All this time, I thought I was just busy. Too many work trips, missed calls. I chalked it up to life. But it wasn't random. I remembered the vacations they didn't tell me about, the sudden change in tone when legal matters came up, the moments I brushed off because who wants to believe their own family is phasing them out? Now I had it. In writing. I printed the email, hands steady despite the tremor in my chest. This wasn't oversight. It was strategy. In that moment, the weight of it all settled in. They didn't forget me. They removed me. With intent, with time, with coordination. But not anymore. I placed the email in the same folder as the trust papers. Then I added something else, a copy of last year's bank statement showing every dollar I'd quietly paid toward estate taxes. Let them try to ignore that. "They didn't just forget me," I said to the empty room. "They erased me, and now they're going to remember." That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sabrina's smug grin and my mother's quiet gaze from a dozen moments that suddenly felt full of meaning. By sunrise, the decision was made. I drove across town, past the park where I used to walk with Emery, gripping the wheel like it might break. This wasn't about confrontation. I wanted clarity, one thread of decency to hold on to. I picked up a bouquet of white tulips from a street vendor. Mom always said they reminded her of peace. Maybe she'd see it as an olive branch. She opened the door herself, still in her robe, eyes surprised but not unkind. "Davina," she said, stepping aside. "Come in." The sunroom was warm, bathed in soft light. She poured tea. I handed her the flowers and tried not to look desperate. "I just want to talk," I said, sitting across from her, "about the house, about everything." I laid it out, calmly at first. The mortgage filing, the old email, my payments, the trust. Her eyes didn't widen, her hands didn't tremble. She just stared into her teacup. Then I asked, "Mom, did you know? Did you know what they were planning?" She took a long breath and looked up at me. "Your sister is starting a family," she said. "She needs this more than you do." A crack split open inside me. Not denial, not shock, just justification. It's not about needing, Mom. It's about lying, she sighed. You've always been so sensitive. This wasn't meant to hurt you. I swallowed the ache. Then why does it feel like I was written out of my own family? Her voice softened, but not enough. We had to simplify things. You were always so busy. Sabrina stepped up. No apology, no admission, just a quiet verdict. I didn't count. I stood. Not fast, not loud, just final. I'm not here for permission. I'm not here to beg, I said. If this keeps going, I'll bring everything to light. The trust, the payments, the documents, all of it. She blinked. Her lip trembled, but she said nothing. I moved toward the door. On the hallway wall, our family photos lined the trim, smiling faces, grandkids, beach trips. But mine was missing. A deliberate space, a quiet erasure. I paused, hand on the doorknob. You taught me to protect what's mine, I whispered, even if that means protecting it from you. The silence stretched for 3 days, not even a check-in from Eleanor. Then, just after lunch on Friday, a message lit up my phone. From Dad. We need to talk about formalities. Come by tomorrow evening. Formalities. That was Dad's favorite way of softening ugly truths. I already knew what this was, a push to make it official, but I was done playing defense. The next evening, I walked into the study where I used to do my homework as a kid. Now, it smelled like lemon polish and betrayal. Gordon sat behind his desk like a CEO. Across from him, Sabrina and Martin perched on the edge of the couch, smug and comfortable. A thick manila envelope lay waiting. It's just a formality, Dad said, sliding it toward me. A simple waiver. You've always had your career. Your sister's building a family now. This will make everything smoother for the future. I opened it. A quitclaim deed. Signing it meant giving up any past, present, or future legal right to the estate. Is this a joke? I asked. No one's trying to hurt you, Eleanor added from the doorway. We're just being practical. My gaze swept the room. 4 people pretending this was fairness. Sabrina wouldn't even meet my eyes. You're not asking me to sign a paper? I said, voice low but sharp. You're asking me to vanish. Martin chuckled. Oh, come on. Don't make this bigger than it is. I put the pen down. No. Gordon leaned forward. Davina, I've paid property taxes on this house for nearly a decade, out of my own pocket, from a trust you didn't even know existed, and now you want me to walk away so Sabrina can slap her name on a deed she didn't earn? Sabrina scoffed. You were never around. I cut her off. And yet I was the only one keeping the lights on. I looked at Dad. You spent years pretending I didn't care, but you were never paying attention. Martin muttered under his breath. Jesus, she's dramatic. I stopped at the door, turned slowly, and met his eyes. Keep pushing, I said, and I'll show you what dramatic really looks like. 2 days later, I parked in front of the estate with no announcement, no agenda, just a need to collect the last of my things. No one was supposed to be home. The plan was to be invisible. I entered through the side door, letting the scent of lemon oil and aged wood guide me down the hall. My feet led me instinctively to Granddad's old study. The room had been quiet since his funeral, still as a photograph. I bent to grab a small stack of books I'd left in the corner, but something poking out from beneath a side table caught my eye. Blueprints, rolled tight, bound in a rubber band. I pulled them free, expecting maybe renovations for the kitchen or roof. But what I saw knocked the breath from my chest. Plans to gut the eastern wing, where Emery's library stood. His sanctuary, the shelves he carved by hand, the stained glass skylight he designed for moonlight reading. Gone. To make way for a gym and a media lounge, scrawled in Sharpie on the margins. I sank into his old armchair, the blueprints shaking in my lap. They weren't just stealing the estate. They were erasing its soul. I called Walter. They're planning demolition, I said. The library, Emery's library. There was a pause on the line, then his voice, low and deliberate. If they file for demolition, it triggers a legal review. The trust will red flag the title. Finally, a line in the sand. I hung up, already opening my laptop. First, I emailed the local historical society, attaching photos of the library's craftsmanship. Then I messaged Rachel Feldman, an old friend from college, now a reporter for the Herald. Let them try to build their fantasy house on bones. I gathered the trust documents, stacked them with the demolition plans, and slipped them into my bag. As I stepped outside, the sun dipped low over the trees. Martin was coming up the driveway, dressed like he owned the place. He looked startled. "Didn't expect you here today," I smiled. "I know, that's the fun part." By Saturday afternoon, the estate had been staged like a showroom. Hors d'oeuvres circled on trays, soft jazz played from corner speakers, and local donors mingled with board members of the Preservation Society. At the center of it all stood Martin, beaming like he was hosting a charity gala, not a hostile takeover. I stayed near the back, arms crossed, watching him flash his polished grin and say, "We're reimagining Oak Ridge, making it fit the times." He went on about open floor plans, decluttering the past, and legacy stewardship. He even called himself the estate manager. That was the final straw. I stepped forward, slow and certain. "You're not the manager. You don't hold any legal authority here." The room hushed. Martin laughed awkwardly. "Davina, let's not—" "No," I cut in. "Let's." I pulled a folder from my tote and held it up. "These are trust documents. Your name isn't anywhere on them. You have no deed, no legal appointment. You're not managing anything. You're playing pretend." Gasps broke around us like shattered glass. Sabrina went pale. My father stiffened. Martin tried to speak again, but his voice cracked. The meeting fell apart within minutes. Donors left quietly. The society's representative promised to review everything. I stepped outside for air, heart pounding, when I heard the door open behind me. It was Eleanor. Her face was tight, eyes unreadable. "You went too far," she said. "This could have stayed in the family." I turned slowly, my voice low. "You already chose which part of the family mattered." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Found this in your desk, sealed, unopened." She froze. I unfolded the letter, my fingers trembling. Emery's handwriting, bold and unmistakable. "If you're reading this, Davina," it began, "they've tried to rewrite what we built, protect Oak Ridge. You were always the one who understood." I looked at her. "You kept this from me." She didn't deny it. "Because I knew once it started, it would never stop. You'd burn every bridge." "No," I said. "You burned them when you decided silence was safer than standing up for what was right." Sabrina stepped out then, already on the defense. "You're twisting things." "No," I said again, louder this time. "I'm revealing them." And I walked away, Emery's letter in one hand, the truth in the other. 2 days after the explosion at the estate gathering, I arranged a formal meeting at Walter Jenkins' office. Neutral ground, hardwood floors, dusty bookshelves, a fireplace nobody ever lit. They arrived together, Gordon, Eleanor, Sabrina, Martin, seated across from me like it was a business negotiation. They still thought I was bluffing. Walter adjusted his glasses, glanced at me, then opened the leather-bound file I handed him. "This," he said, voice steady, "is the Harrington Legacy Trust, executed and witnessed by Emery himself." He flipped a page. "Davina Harrington is the sole trustee and beneficiary of the estate known as Oak Ridge. All decisions regarding its preservation, use, or transfer rest solely with her." The room went silent. Walter's voice cut through it again. "Any attempt to mortgage, demolish, or reallocate ownership, without her explicit consent, is void." Gordon's jaw clenched. Sabrina's mouth dropped open. Martin leaned forward like he could talk his way around it. Then came the second blow. "I must also disclose," Walter said slowly, "that shortly after Emery's passing, Gordon asked me to keep this trust document quiet. He didn't want it filed, said he needed time to restructure the family's path forward." Eleanor gasped. "You said you were protecting us." "I was protecting your plan," Walter corrected, "not the law, and certainly not Emery's wishes." Sabrina turned to Gordon, eyes sharp. "You told me she was out, that there was nothing left to fight for." Martin stood up. "This changes nothing. It changes everything," I said, rising to my feet. "You've all treated me like a placeholder, a burden, but I've been the one holding this place up for years." I laid out my terms, voice even. "No demolition, no remodel. You're out of this house permanently. I'm applying for historical status. Oak Ridge will be protected, legally and publicly." Gordon tried to speak again. Walter cut him off. You've lost all authority here. The trust stands. Sabrina stormed out, muttering obscenities under her breath. Martin followed, throwing one last glare my way. Eleanor didn't move. Her eyes were glassy, mouth closed. But still, she said nothing. I crossed the room and placed Emery's letter on the fireplace mantel, right beneath his portrait. He trusted me, and I kept that promise. The next morning, I woke to the hush of Oak Ridge. No footsteps upstairs, no whispers in the hallway, just the soft creak of wood settling, the sound of the house breathing again. For the first time, I felt it was breathing with me. The sun spilled through the library skylight, catching dust motes in golden streams. I sat beneath it, coffee warming my hands, Emery's letter resting beside me on the old armchair. He built this place with patience and vision. I had fought to keep it with truth. It hadn't been about revenge, not really. It was about memory, honor, lineage. Word of what happened had already begun to spread. Gordon had quietly stepped down from his position on the legal board, citing personal matters. His silence in the papers spoke louder than any denial. Sabrina and Martin sold their condo in the city and moved out of state. No farewell, no explanation. But people whispered. They always do. I never corrected the stories. I didn't need to. Eleanor sent me a handwritten note. Short, slanted, heavy with unsaid things. You were right. I just wasn't strong enough to stand beside you. There was no apology. But there was recognition. And for now, that would do. Oak Ridge was declared a historical landmark 3 weeks later. I hosted an open house with the local history society. The town showed up. So did Walter. So did old neighbors who remembered Emery's gardening lectures or his annual 4th of July stories. One woman told me, he'd be proud of what you've done. That night, I stood alone outside beneath the oak tree, the same one Emery planted the day my mother was born. I looked up through the branches, felt the weight of what had been saved, not just wood and walls, but truth. I wasn't healed, not completely, but I wasn't invisible anymore. Back inside, I closed the library doors, the letter still on the mantel beside Emery's photo. I whispered to both. Some people inherit legacy, others protect it. I was never meant to inherit Oak Ridge. I was meant to fight for it. Sometimes the people you love most will ask you to shrink yourself, quiet your voice, doubt your worth, for the sake of keeping peace. But silence isn't peace, and loyalty shouldn't come at the cost of your dignity. What I learned from this fight wasn't just about legal rights or family property. It was about remembering who I am, without their permission. Legacy isn't just what's handed down to you. Sometimes it's what you refuse to let go of. And maybe, just maybe, the fiercest kind of love is the kind that protects what others are too afraid to. So let me ask you, have you ever had to stand your ground when everyone expected you to stay quiet? Have you ever protected something, an idea, a place, a part of yourself, because no one else would? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from, or just type 1 if this story resonated with you in any way. And hey, if it didn't, that's okay too. Tell me why. I'm here to listen, not just speak. If this video moved you, inspired you, or even made you think a little deeper, go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Your support helps us keep telling real human stories that matter. Thank you for being here. Hi, my name's Marla, and last Thanksgiving, my parents handed me a paper plate and said, "She's used to scraps," before sending me, and my kids, to eat in the garage. No table, no seat, not even a glance from anyone who shared my blood. But what hurt more wasn't that moment. It was realizing it wasn't the first time. They'd been editing me out for years, cropping me from photos, leaving me out of group texts, erasing my name from a house I helped build. And just when I thought I'd disappear quietly, a woman in a limo pulled up and asked for me. By name. Why would a stranger know my worth, when my own family didn't? Would you have stayed silent? Or would you have done what I did next? I should have known the moment we pulled into Brielle's driveway. The Range Rovers gleamed under the Charleston sun like showroom trophies, lined up perfectly. Laughter spilled through the half-open windows, not loud or wild, just polished, curated, like everything my sister touched. I parked in the shade, not because I wanted to, but because I wasn't about to take one of the spots near the entrance. Those were for people who were expected. I'd learned not to mistake a holiday invitation for actual inclusion. "Ready?" I asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. Rowan nodded. He was 12 now, taller than I remembered him becoming, still growing into his quiet strength. Opal clutched a pie dish with both hands, her knuckles white. She was trying too hard to smile. "They'll be happy we brought dessert," I said, though no one had asked us to. We rang the bell. Nothing. I knocked. Still nothing. "Just go in," Rowan muttered. "They never answer." He was right. The door opened with a creak that should have been fixed years ago, but wasn't. Probably too small to matter in a house filled with marble counters and heated floors. Inside, warmth. Not the emotional kind. Just the physical glow of candles, lighting, too many bodies in expensive fabrics. Brielle spotted us immediately, her lips forming something that wasn't quite a smile. "Oh, you made it." Her voice carried just enough volume for others to hear. "We're a little tight on space this year." There was no hug, no, "Let me take your coat," or "What a beautiful pie." She glanced at the casserole Opal held and tilted her head. "You can set that in the kitchen. I think we've already got 3. My mouth opened to respond. But what was I going to say? That we'd made it from scratch? That Opal mashed the sweet potatoes herself? That I couldn't afford the pecans, but bought them anyway? No one cared. I nudged Opal gently, and we moved toward the kitchen. No one really turned to look at us. The hallway smelled like rosemary and lemon cleaner, cold, like the kind you use in homes that are too perfect to touch. The dining room was already set. Long table, 10 chairs, 3 booster seats, name cards with embossed lettering. Ours weren't there. I searched once, then again, slower. Nothing. "Mom," Opal whispered. "Where do we sit?" Before I could answer, Brielle appeared again, this time holding 3 paper plates. "We set up the garage," she said lightly. "It's quieter out there. More your speed, right?" And then she added, too cheerfully, "She's used to scraps." Every conversation in the room dropped. I felt the weight of their silence crash down like a stone. Eyes darted away. Someone coughed. My mother took a sip from her wine glass and looked past me, toward the fireplace. I didn't flinch, didn't cry. I just took the plates from Brielle's hands. "Thanks," I said. "We'll get settled." The garage was exactly what I'd expected. Concrete floor, folding table, 1 chair, 1 crate, 1 stool that still had a price sticker on it. A roll of paper towels sat in the middle, like a joke no one bothered to finish. Rowan sat silently, his shoulders squared. Opal stood by the crate, hesitant. "Why are we eating here? Did we do something wrong?" "No," I said. "No, baby, we didn't." She climbed onto the crate, balancing her dish on her knees. I passed her a plastic fork. Rowan took his plate without a word. The food came in mismatched Tupperware. Brielle's nanny, or maybe the housekeeper, dropped it off with a forced smile. No turkey platter, just slices. No gravy, just dry mashed potatoes. And of course, no second helpings. I wanted to say something, anything, but if I opened my mouth, it would crack. And I'd had enough of crying behind closed doors while others sipped wine inside. Instead, I picked up my phone, took a photo of the paper plate. Not for sympathy, not for proof. Just to remind myself. I texted the picture to myself with a single caption. "Next time, remember this." So I stayed quiet, not for their comfort, but to protect what was mine. I watched Opal push her food around the plate with her fork, the paper bending under the pressure. Rowan sat across from her, hunched slightly, chewing slowly like the act itself felt like a chore. I could hear the hum of the dishwasher through the garage wall, followed by muffled laughter. Brielle's laugh, unmistakably sharp, followed by someone's clinking glass. A few minutes passed like that, maybe longer. long enough for the draft under the side door to feel like winter itself had settled inside the room. Then, someone opened the interior door. Judith, my mother. She didn't step in. She stayed just at the threshold, her silhouette framed by warm light. She held a small gift box wrapped in gold paper. Her eyes skimmed over the garage setup like she was glancing into a broom closet, not a space where her daughter and grandchildren were eating dinner. Brielle wanted me to give this to you, she said, setting the box down on the edge of the table. She said it was from both of you. I didn't correct her. I knew exactly what it was. I'd bought that scarf myself a week ago, picked it out, paid cash. I even wrote a small note and slid it under the ribbon. Happy Thanksgiving. I know you don't say it, but I still hope you're proud. But the card was gone. Probably tucked in the trash under the kitchen sink with the pie Opal baked. Judith didn't wait for a thank you. She turned and disappeared back into the warmth. The door clicked shut behind her. She gave your gift away, Rowan asked, voice low but steady. I nodded once. Opal's brow furrowed. Why would she do that? They didn't forget, baby, I said gently. They just pretend I'm not part of this when it's convenient. That night, after we got home, after I'd tucked them into their beds and double-checked the locks, I opened my phone and scrolled through old messages. There was a group chat named Thanksgiving 23. I hadn't been added. Of course not. I remembered hearing someone say earlier, didn't Marla get the memo about the dress code? That's when it clicked. There had been coordination, a theme, inside jokes, a full plan, and I wasn't even a footnote. The next morning, while making oatmeal for the kids, I opened a blank note and started typing, start documenting, every time they rewrite the story without you in it. I thought about my wedding invitation that never made it to Aunt Carla, even though I mailed it 3 weeks ahead. About how no one showed up to Rowan's school play, even though it was on the calendar. About my birthday cake that said Marta instead of Marla. And Judith had laughed, it's close enough. It wasn't accidental. It never had been. It was just refined. Invisibilizing someone isn't loud. It's quiet, practiced, polished over time, until it looks like etiquette instead of cruelty. Later that evening, I saw my cousin Lila near the dessert table, chatting with a few others. She caught my eye and said, "Oh, hey! Were you ever added to the planning thread? The whole thing happened on Facebook this year. Brielle was stressing out about head count." I smiled. Not too wide. "Nope," I said. "But that's okay. I usually find out where I'm supposed to be once I'm already there." Lila blinked. "Oh, well, you know how things get lost online sometimes." Sure they do. Before heading back to the garage, I slipped into the hallway to grab more napkins. The family room was full of wine and flashbulbs. Someone had set up a ring light for pictures. Brielle stood beside the fireplace, posing with Judith and the other grandkids. Rowan and Opal weren't in the photo. Neither was I. I didn't interrupt. I didn't ask why. I already knew. That night, as we drove home through the dim streets of Charleston, Opal sat quietly in the back seat, hugging the pie dish we'd brought. It was untouched. Rowan looked out the window and said, "It's not little, you know, our apartment." "I know," I said. "It's not fancy, but it's ours." I reached back and touched his knee, just briefly. "Exactly. We don't need fancy. We need true." When we got inside, I kicked off my boots, shrugged off my jacket, and sat on the floor for a moment. Just to breathe. Just to feel the difference between that house and this one. I opened my phone again and typed a new line into my notes. They want me edited, but I'm writing in ink, because when your name is spoken like an afterthought, it's time to rewrite your place. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was crying or upset. No. It was the kind of wakefulness that settles when your mind's done asking questions and starts taking notes. I laid in bed, listening to the radiator click, Rowan's steady breathing from the next room, and Opal's light rhythmic turning in her sleep. By morning, I'd written 3 entries in my phone, each one documenting the kinds of moments that don't make headlines but never leave your ribs. We returned to Brielle's house later that day for what she called leftover lunch. Same crowd, same table. The main difference was the tension in my own chest, heavier now but strangely clearer. While everyone else filled their plates in the kitchen, I stayed back with Opal and Rowan. We waited until the line thinned. I didn't feel like fighting for a spot at the buffet. That's when I heard it. "Heck, just give her what's left. She's used to scraps," my father said casually, while handing a container of stuffing to Brielle. He wasn't even trying to be quiet. The stuffing wasn't what stung. It was the tone. Like I wasn't standing 3 feet away. Like I was an anecdote at a dinner party, not his daughter. Like my children didn't have ears and dignity of their own. I froze mid-step. Rowan looked at me, not panicked, just bracing. Opal blinked at the floor, as if staring hard enough might make it open and swallow us. I didn't say a word. I just reached out and took the container, calmly, like the staff would. Which apparently was the role I'd been assigned this year. As I turned to walk away, Brielle gave me a half smile. Not warm, not even sarcastic. Just satisfied. Later that afternoon, I helped clear some of the paper plates and cups from the porch. Most folks had shifted inside. I stayed out of the way. Old habit. That's when Tamron approached. Brielle's friend, wore too much perfume, and talked like she narrated her own life in hashtags. She spotted me stacking plates and grinned. "Oh, I thought you were one of the helpers. Could you grab more ice from the downstairs fridge?" There was no malice in her voice. That's what made it worse. I turned to her and said calmly, "I'm not part of the staff, but I've been treated like one for years." She blinked, smiled awkwardly, and walked off without another word. Brielle stood nearby, watching. She didn't laugh. She didn't apologize. She just raised her glass toward me slightly, like she was toasting a punchline only she understood. I didn't flinch. I didn't fold. I simply turned and walked to the garage, where I knew our seats were still waiting. We stayed for the family game hour, which was apparently a new tradition this year. Charades, group trivia, some board games for the kids. I wasn't asked to play, not even once. While collecting discarded cups, I bumped into Kellen, Brielle's youngest. He was eating a cookie, face sticky, and completely unaware that his little mouth would soon deliver the deepest cut of the day. He looked up and said, laughing, "Mom says you never made anything of your life. Is that why you don't come for Christmas?" I stood still, stunned not by what he said, but how easily it came out. No hesitation, no malice. Just truth, as told to him. Opal was standing behind me. I turned to check her face. She looked confused, not because she didn't understand the sentence, but because she understood it too well. I crouched beside her and took her hand. "It's not true," I said quietly. "Some people just repeat things they've heard, not things they know." She didn't reply. She nodded, though, a slow, processing nod. I should have felt rage, or shame, or maybe heartbreak. But I didn't. What I felt was done. Done being polite so others wouldn't feel guilty. Done being edited out of the story they tell when it suits them. Later, after the sun started dipping and the garage began cooling down again, I found a spare napkin near the paper towel roll. I pulled out a pen from my purse and wrote 3 words in the corner. Not this year. I folded it, tucked it into my jacket pocket. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to beg for a seat. They had shown me exactly who they were. And now, for the first time, I was listening without excuse. I looked at Rowan. He gave me a small nod, like he already knew. Opal leaned into my side, her eyes heavy but calm. Maybe next Thanksgiving, they'll wonder where we went. Maybe someone will look around and ask, "Has anyone heard from Marla?" And if they do, I hope they sit with the silence that follows. So I decided to stop disappearing. The garage had grown colder, but not unkind. After we left that afternoon, I let the kids watch something soft on TV while I folded laundry and reheated leftover spaghetti. Nothing fancy, just something warm and filling. Something that didn't come out of a foil tray or a casserole dish someone else picked out for us. That night, I sat on the couch in silence. I stared at the paper plate still in my purse from the garage. I hadn't thrown it away. I couldn't. Not yet. It wasn't trash. It was proof. The next day, we returned to Brielle's house for what she called the real Thanksgiving, as if the one we already lived through had just been a rehearsal. She texted, "Bring the kids. Mom wants to do the slideshow." We arrived just before sunset. The house was lit up again, golden and loud. The kind of loud that didn't leave room for quiet people to speak. I took off my coat and folded it over my arm. Judith gave me a tight smile before turning back to the oven. The family room had been rearranged to face a blank wall. A portable projector stood on a small table, wires snaking behind furniture. Judith called for everyone to sit. "We put together something special," she said, glass in hand. "A trip through time." The lights dimmed. Photos began to flicker. Snapshots of holidays past, ski trips, recitals, Brielle's graduation, her kids' first birthdays. Everyone laughed at the same moments, gasped at the same baby pictures. And I waited. I waited for my face. I waited for my children's faces. There I was, once, barely visible in the corner of a blurry 4th of July shot. I recognized the shirt I wore that day only because I remembered spilling mustard on it. There were no captions, no context, just flashes of a life that had apparently continued without me. Next to me, Opal whispered, "Were we not here back then?" I swallowed hard. "We were, just not where the camera pointed." She nodded slowly, like she'd just learned something adults don't usually teach out loud. After the lights came back on, people moved toward dessert. I followed Judith into the kitchen, taking my time. "Hey," I said softly. "The slideshow was nice. I didn't realize we weren't part of the story." Judith didn't turn around. She was spooning whipped cream onto a pie like it needed to be perfect for the camera. "It's not about you, Marla. Let's not make a scene. Tonight is for Brielle." I nodded. "Got it. I didn't realize existing was making a scene." She looked at me then, tight-lipped, but not sorry. Back in the garage, Rowan scooted his chair closer to mine. No one said a word. But the air had shifted. The unspoken pact, me pretending they weren't erasing us if I smiled hard enough, was gone. Opal pulled a napkin toward her and began drawing. A stick figure version of herself, another for Rowan, and one with short curly hair she labeled Mom. There were no cousins, no grandparents. "Can I put it on the fridge?" she asked. Yeah, baby. You can." As the evening wound down, I watched people pack up leftovers they didn't offer us. Brielle's husband laughed loudly about something corporate. Judith posed for photos with other grandkids, arms perfectly positioned like a pageant queen. I wasn't asked to be in any of them. I'd stopped hoping. When we got home, I tucked the kids in early. They were full, not from food, but from the weight of being on guard. I stayed in the kitchen and opened my phone. I looked again at the napkin in my jacket pocket, the one I'd written on yesterday. Not this year. Then I opened notes and typed, "They won't notice you leave, but they'll be loud when you're gone." I stared at it for a while. Then I deleted it. I typed something else instead. "Start again, but not here." I stared at those words for a long time before locking my phone and heading to bed. They don't want the truth. They just want the version of the story where I vanish quietly, where I'm generous in my absence, easy to explain. But I'm not fading. I'm choosing. And I stepped through, with no intention of looking back. It was somewhere between folding the last blanket and reaching for the light switch in the garage when I saw them. Headlights, cutting clean across the driveway like they had business being there. Not a visitor's SUV or one of Brielle's smug carpool moms. No. This was different. Black, long, quiet. A limousine. I stood still, half expecting it to reverse and drive away, realizing they had the wrong house. But instead, it kept rolling, slow and deliberate, past the front walkway, curving around the side, toward the garage. Inside the house, silhouettes shifted behind the window panes. Curtains moved. I imagined Judith craning her neck with that same pinched curiosity she wore when the neighbor's son got arrested 2 years ago. Rowan looked up from his chair. "You see that?" "Yeah," I said, barely above a whisper. The limo came to a gentle stop near the side entrance, its engine cut off with the kind of finality that made my chest tighten. Then the back door opened. A woman stepped out. She was tall, maybe mid-60s, with silver-streaked hair and a navy coat that screamed tailored, not off the rack. She didn't look lost. She didn't look confused. She looked intentional. Opal clutched my sleeve. "Mom, she's coming here." The woman walked with grace, not the hurried kind of someone running late, but the sort of pace that made you pause and wonder what she knew that you didn't. She stopped just outside the garage and knocked gently on the side door. 3 soft taps. I opened it halfway. The cold air poured in, but she didn't flinch. "Excuse me," she said, voice calm and low. "I'm looking for Marla Wexley." It's strange how your own name can feel like a gift when spoken by someone who actually means it. "That's me," I answered. She took one small step forward. "I'm Helene Miles." There was a beat of silence as her name landed. I'd heard it before. On newsletters, on conference flyers, on a grant application I didn't finish 2 years ago because I couldn't afford to take time off work to attend the info session. "I'm co-founder of Women Who Lift," she added. "I believe we met once, though I don't think you knew who I was." I blinked. "I'm sorry, About 5 years ago," she continued. "Winter, you were volunteering at the Oakley shelter. My mother, she didn't speak much English. She was trying to apply for Medicaid, and everyone was too busy or too tired. But you sat with her. You translated using Google on your phone. You held her hand when she got overwhelmed." I stared at her, memory trickling back like slow light through blinds. "My mother passed away last spring," Helene said, eyes steady. "But before she died, she made me promise to find the young woman who helped her when no one else did." My breath caught. I had no idea what to say. "You didn't ask for anything," she added, "but you made space for someone no one else saw. And now, I'd like to do the same for you." Behind her, I saw Judith's face in the window, mouth slightly open. Brielle hovered beside her, arms crossed. "I'm sorry, why now?" I asked. Careful, guarded. Helene smiled. "Because our annual summit is coming up, and we need a keynote speaker, someone who understands visibility, not because she chases the spotlight, but because she's been made to live without one." I felt my knees almost give. Not from shock, but from the quiet pressure of being seen. "We'll cover travel, childcare, accommodations," she said. "And we'd like to discuss a publishing deal for your essays. You have a voice, Marla, and I think a lot of women need to hear it." Rowan stood next to me now. Opal held onto my hand tighter. I started, then stopped. My eyes darted back toward the house. Judith's expression was unreadable. Brielle looked frozen, as if she couldn't quite process what she was witnessing. I turned back to Helene. "Why here? Why come all the way?" "I called the organization you used to write for," she explained. "They gave me your last known address. I drove here, thinking I might catch you before the day ended." The corners of her lips lifted. "And I figured, if someone's been forced into the garage, it says more about the house than it does about them." That was it. That sentence. That truth. I felt something click into place inside me that had been rattling loose for years. I didn't look back at the window again. "Okay," I said. "Yes, I'll do it." Helene reached into her coat and handed me a small folder. Details, a letter, a business card. And then she said it again, like she'd practiced. "Marla." My name, said clearly, with purpose. "You're not invisible. You never were. They just stopped looking." Opal's eyes sparkled. Rowan stood a little taller. For once, I said slowly, the door opened for me, and not because I knocked. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my presence. That's what kept repeating in my head as we walked back into the house. The door had barely clicked behind us when the stillness of the garage was replaced by the familiar buzz inside. The sound of wine glasses clinking, laughter rehearsed, and words that felt polished enough to bruise. Rowan was just ahead of me, hands tucked into his hoodie. Opal still held Helene's folder like it was sacred. I hadn't told them yet what it meant or how big it really was. I didn't need to. They knew something had changed. I could feel it in the way Rowan walked straighter, and Opal held my hand without asking. We were only supposed to grab our coats and leave, but curiosity slowed me down near the hallway that led to the main living room. That hallway. I'd avoided it for years. It was where Judith hung her legacy, the framed family portraits arranged in perfect symmetry, updated annually, like seasonal decorations. I paused in front of the newest edition. A large photo, carefully centered, taken in early autumn, judging by the color of the leaves in the background. Everyone was there. Brielle's family, of course. Her husband Clayton, with his hand possessively on her shoulder. Their 3 kids, in matching outfits. Judith and Arnold sat in front, arms resting gently on their knees, like royalty in retirement. Smiling, polished, permanent. Except we weren't in it. Not me, not Rowan, not Opal. It wasn't a surprise, it was a confirmation. You couldn't make it that day, remember? Judith's voice broke through behind me, casual, as if she'd wandered in by accident. I turned slightly. She was holding a half-filled wine glass, standing with one foot tilted, like she might walk away if the conversation got uncomfortable. I remember, I said, my voice even. It was scheduled for a Thursday. You told me on a Wednesday night. She raised an eyebrow, like that little detail had slipped her mind. We didn't think it'd be a big deal. Of course not. She didn't reply, just smiled that polite, dismissive way of hers, and walked off toward the kitchen. A few minutes later, we found ourselves in the dining room again, right as Brielle stood up with a glass in hand. I just want to thank everyone for being here today, she said, all polished charm. This family means everything to me. We're not perfect, but we show up. That counts for something. A few heads nodded. Ah, and, well, she added with a chuckle, even Marla's little writing project got us some attention this year. Who knew trauma blogs could go so far? Laughter rippled through the room like static. Light, uncomfortable. The kind of laugh people do when they know they shouldn't, but they want to stay on the right side of the joke. I raised my glass and stood. Pain sells when it's real, I said. I suppose that's why you've never published. Silence. Rowan didn't blink. Opal just reached for my hand under the table. Clayton cleared his throat. Judith's lips pressed together. Brielle froze, her mouth open just enough to show her teeth, but not form words. I sat back down slowly, still holding my glass. No one said anything for a solid 10 seconds. That night, after the air had thinned out and the guests trickled down to just family, I found my father in the garage. He was moving empty boxes around, pretending to be helpful. He looked surprised when I walked in. Need something? He asked. Yes, I said. The truth. He paused. Okay. That house on Crescent View, I said. The one I helped renovate, paid the initial taxes on, signed as a co-owner when Brielle and Clayton couldn't qualify a loan. He looked uncomfortable. What about it? I checked the records. My name's not on it anymore. His shoulders dropped. We moved it into Brielle's name last year. Tax purposes. You weren't involved anymore. I nodded once. So I didn't just disappear from your photos. You made it official. Marla. You erased me, on paper. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. I'm not here to fight, Dad. I just needed to hear it, out loud, so I know I'm not making it up. I turned and walked out, leaving the smell of cardboard and stale holiday leftovers behind me. In the garage, I found Rowan and Opal already curled up on the worn couch we'd been using. The space felt smaller than it had a few hours ago. Or maybe we just didn't fit into it anymore. I didn't explain what had just happened. Instead, I looked at Rowan and asked, "What would you build if no one gave you a place at the table?" He shrugged. "Our own table, bigger." I smiled. That was enough. Now they're trying to drag chairs in. But it's too late. I'm already building something better. The morning after Helene left, the air in the house shifted. But not in the way you'd expect after a life-changing offer. It didn't feel celebratory. It felt staged. Like someone had repainted the set overnight, but left the actors reading the same tired lines. Judith approached first, holding a mug of herbal tea she hadn't touched. "Marla," she said, tone unnaturally smooth, "I just want to say I'm proud of you. Really. This whole thing, it's a big deal." She waited for me to say thank you. I didn't. "And," she continued, forcing a smile, maybe there's a way we can all be part of it." That's when Brielle walked in, voice too bright. "Yes! I was just telling Mom. We should do something joint. A feature maybe. Sisters. Strong women. A family legacy." I blinked. "A joint interview," she repeated, as if I hadn't understood. "We tell the story of how we grew up together, how we supported each other. A full circle moment." I stared at her. "You mean the version where you erase what actually happened and pose for the credit photo?" Brielle laughed. "But it was the brittle kind." "Come on, Marla, don't be dramatic. The public loves a good redemption arc." "I'm not your redemption," I said evenly. "I'm the chapter you tried to rip out, and now you want it back because people started reading." Judith cleared her throat. "Let's not do this now." "Of course not," I said. "Not when it's inconvenient." Neither of them said anything else, and I didn't wait for them to recover. That afternoon, there was a cousins' brunch in the backyard. Matching outfits, balloons. Brielle had even hired a photographer to capture candid moments. I wasn't invited to help. That much was clear. But Opal saw the other kids being herded together for a photo and naturally walked toward them. She was holding a flower crown she made out of dandelions and ribbon from a gift bag. Her hair was curled that morning. She'd asked me to do it. Just as she stepped toward the group, Judith reached out and stopped her with one hand. "This one is just for the cousins this time," she said. Opal blinked up at her, unsure. I was already walking toward them. Not fast, just steady. "Opal," I said, "come on." She didn't argue. Just slipped her hand into mine and followed me out of the frame. I didn't say anything to Judith. I didn't need to. Her eyes said it all. This was her version of keeping the family narrative tidy. Keep it clean, keep it filtered. We left the brunch early. On the drive back, no one spoke. Opal stared out the window. Rowan fiddled with the strap of his backpack. Once we got home, I didn't collapse onto the couch like I usually did. I grabbed my laptop. I opened a new document. Title: Building a Table Without Permission. Rowan walked past, paused at the sight of the title, then nodded once before heading to his room. Opal came in a few minutes later and sat beside me. She laid her head on my shoulder. "Are we still part of the family?" she asked. I turned to her. "We never stopped being a family. They just stopped seeing it." "Can we make our own?" I smiled, kissed her forehead. "We already are." Later that week, I emailed Helene, confirmed my slot for the keynote, sent her a working draft of the speech, attached a few blog samples, included a note at the bottom. No joint interviews, no family legacy angle. I'm not a brand. I'm a person who survived them. She replied 3 hours later. "Understood. You're the story, not the backdrop." The next morning, Brielle called. I let it ring. Then she texted, "We're organizing a watch party for your summit speech. Want to make it a full family thing?" I replied simply, "No." And that silence, that's how I knew they finally heard me. I didn't plan to check my phone first thing the next morning, but when I saw the screen glow before the sun even cracked through the blinds, I knew something was off. 2 missed calls from a neighbor, 3 texts from a woman I hadn't spoken to since Rowan was in diapers. And then, the tag. Someone had posted about me, publicly. I opened the Facebook link and there it was, a post from Judith, already shared 73 times by people with names like Linda M. from First Baptist and Janice L., prayer warrior. The caption sat heavy at the top, right under a photo of me in middle school, braces and bangs and all. Our daughter Marla has forgotten where she came from. We supported her dreams, gave her everything we had. But now that she's found success, she's cut off her own family. Sometimes fame changes people, and not always for the better. Beneath it, she'd included a blurry photo taken from behind a curtain. It was me and the kids in the garage, eating off paper plates. The angle made it look like we'd chosen to be there, like it was some quiet moment of reflection, not exile. The comments poured in. She should be ashamed. Sad what happens to kids these days when they get too big for their roots. You never stop being a mother, no matter how old they get. I put the phone down and walked to the kitchen. Poured coffee with a hand that didn't shake, but only because I refused to let it. I took one sip, set the mug down, and leaned against the counter. Judith didn't just twist the story, she weaponized it. By noon, the post had spread across 3 community groups. One local news blog even reposted it, adding the headline, "Keynote Speaker's Family Speaks Out. She Abandoned Us." Brielle texted that afternoon. "We didn't want it to come to this, but maybe next time, think before shutting people out." I didn't answer. I looked at Opal, curled on the couch with her book, and then at Rowan, who was reading the comments over my shoulder. "You gonna say something?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, just not the way they expect." That night, after dinner, I sat down at my desk and opened a blank post. I didn't write paragraphs. I didn't explain. I let the evidence speak. First, the photo. Opal, sitting on a plastic crate in the garage, holding a slice of pumpkin pie on a paper plate, looking right at the camera. Her eyes calm, her shoulders squared. Then, a screenshot of the family group chat I'd never been added to. Then, a clip of the property deed, my name missing from the title I'd helped pay into. And finally, a short video of Rowan from last year. He was standing in our tiny apartment, looking around proudly. "It's not little," he said. "It's just enough." My caption was short. "This is not abandonment. This is protection. I didn't walk away from family. I walked away from harm." I hit post, logged out. By morning, the ripple had turned into a wave. Comments flowed in, hundreds of them. Strangers, neighbors, old friends I hadn't heard from since college. I was the one in the garage, too. My mother-in-law did the same to me. "You're not alone." Judith's post was deleted by lunch. Brielle didn't reach out again. And yet, the real shift wasn't public. It wasn't about claps or clicks. It was about Opal walking into the kitchen that night and saying, "Everyone's talking about you." "Are they?" "Yeah," she said, "but you don't look scared." I smiled. "That's because I'm not." She tilted her head. "Will Grandma be mad?" "Probably," I said. "But that's hers to carry." Rowan chimed in from the other room. "People only get mad when you stop letting them rewrite your story." And that was the moment I knew I didn't need a rebuttal. I didn't need an apology. I had the truth. I had my children. And for the first time, I had a voice that didn't tremble. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just told the truth loud enough they had to whisper. And for the first time, that was enough. A week had passed since the post, the one where I told the truth, finally, in my own words. It was still being shared, though I'd stopped checking the numbers. Rowan had shown me once or twice, comments, messages from strangers. But I'd quietly asked him not to bring it up anymore. It wasn't about the response. It was about the release. Early Monday morning, while the house was still quiet and the sun barely warming the front steps, I opened my phone and saw a notification from an old email address I rarely checked anymore. It was Judith. Subject, Hope. I stared at it for a long moment before opening the message. Hope you're well? Miss you sometimes? That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a line, vague enough to mean anything and safe enough to mean nothing. I closed the email. I didn't respond right away. I made coffee, fed Opal, packed Rowan's lunch, walked the recycling out to the curb. By the time I sat down again, the email had slipped to the bottom of the inbox, buried under coupons and auto-replies. That evening, once the kids were asleep, I finally replied. We're doing well. Hope you are too. I didn't ask how she was. I didn't say I missed her. Not because I didn't feel something, but because not every feeling deserves a response. Thanksgiving came around again, our first one without them. I didn't tell the kids we weren't going. They didn't ask. That silence was mutual, expected, freeing. We hosted instead. It wasn't formal. There were no place cards, no matching napkins, no Pinterest boards involved. Just 2 card tables pushed together, floor cushions, secondhand chairs. A neighbor brought sweet potatoes. A retired librarian I used to work with showed up with cornbread. One of Opal's friends and her mom came too, the one who just got out of a rough divorce and was figuring things out meal by meal. We passed plates, we told bad jokes, someone's dog knocked over the cranberry sauce, and nobody cared. Opal leaned into me mid-meal and said, "This is better than Grandma's house." Rowan looked up and added, "It's real, that's why." And he was right. 2 weeks later, I stood backstage at the Women Who Lift Summit. My palms weren't sweating, my heart wasn't racing. I was ready. When they called my name, I stepped out under the lights and looked out at the sea of women. Young, old, weary, defiant. I didn't bring up names. I didn't mention garages or paper plates or the feeling of being photographed out of history. Instead, I said this. Sometimes people will push you out of the room so hard, they don't realize they've shoved you straight into your purpose. You land in the cold, in the silence, with no welcome sign. But somehow, it's warmer than where you came from, because it's yours, and because no one gets to take that from you again. The room was quiet for a moment. Then someone stood, and then another, and then all of them. I didn't cry. I didn't smile big for the cameras. I just breathed it in, let it settle deep. Later, Helene found me backstage. She didn't say much, just hugged me. The kind of hug that doesn't require words, because it's earned in knowing. Meanwhile, across town, Brielle's law firm quietly pulled their sponsorship from a national conference. Not because of my post, but because silence speaks volumes when you've built your brand on integrity. Judith hadn't hosted a family event since last Christmas. No one said why, but I knew. It wasn't revenge, it was correction. They weren't destroyed, but their power to define me? That was gone. The following weekend, Opal handed me a drawing. 3 people sitting at a picnic table, crooked legs, uneven cups, big smiles. She pointed. I drew our family. Underneath, in block letters, she'd written, "We're not small, we're just enough." And that's when I understood something I'd spent years unlearning. Healing isn't about going back to what hurt you and hoping it changed. It's about leaving, choosing peace, even when nobody hands it to you. I didn't win. I just stopped needing to. Hi, my name's Marjorie. My parents told everyone they had no choice but to give me up, that I was too much to handle. But the truth? They signed me away like paperwork and bought a house with the check they got for doing it. I spent years thinking I was the broken one, but it turns out I was just the most inconvenient part of their story. Want to know how I gave them back a burden they couldn't sell, silence, or forget? Then keep watching. The table was too quiet for a Wednesday. My brother Wendell kept staring at his plate, like the mashed potatoes were giving him answers. Velma had her arms crossed, like always, ready to defend herself before anyone attacked. The roast on my plate had gone cold, and the silence in the room made it feel colder. Garrett, my father, cleared his throat. Your mom and I talked. He always said that before doing something permanent. Eloise didn't look at me when she spoke. She just tapped her fingernails against her glass. There's a place, Marjorie, a facility. They can give you more structure, something better suited for your needs. My fork slipped from my fingers and clanged against the plate. I was 10. I didn't know what more structure meant. I just knew that my name wasn't in the sentence about staying. Garrett folded a manila envelope and pushed it toward me like it was a school report card. We've made arrangements. It's for the best. No one asked if I wanted to go. No one even tried to pretend they were sad. I waited for someone, anyone, to make eye contact. But Wendell never looked up. Velma pulled her sweater tighter around herself. My mom stood up like she was excusing herself from dinner, not from motherhood, and that was it. We didn't finish the meal. The roast stayed untouched. They left the table first, and I stayed until the kitchen light turned off. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling until I heard footsteps at my door, followed by a soft knock. I didn't answer. Eloise walked in anyway. It's time. She handed me a plastic grocery bag. You won't need much. They have clothes there. My bear? She paused. It's better not to get attached. At 3 a.m, I stepped onto the front porch in socks and sneakers that didn't match. A sedan with faded paint idled in the driveway. A woman in a beige windbreaker leaned against it, flipping through paperwork. The porch light was the only thing left on. I looked back once. No silhouette in the window, no wave. The light clicked off before I even reached the sidewalk. I climbed into the back seat. The woman, her badge said Lynn M., offered me gum. I shook my head. We pulled away from the curb, and the house grew smaller behind us. The same house I had colored pictures in, where I learned to braid my hair, where I scraped my knees and tried to stop the bleeding with paper towels. Gone. Half an hour into the ride, Lynn glanced at me through the mirror. You okay, sweetheart? I wasn't sure what okay meant anymore. Am I still their daughter? I whispered. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter. You're a very brave girl, Marjorie. That was the first time someone called me brave. It didn't make me feel better. It just made me feel further away from home. I leaned my head against the window. Outside, everything was dark and empty, like no one in the world was awake but me. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink hard. I just sat there, quiet, still, until sleep pulled me under. Not because I was tired, but because I already knew no one would be waiting when I woke up. When they finally read the card, it wasn't the message that haunted them. It was who left it. I didn't stick around to see anyone find it. I didn't need to. Some truths don't need witnesses. They just need to be left in plain sight. 3 days earlier, I stood outside the Des Moines bus terminal with a letter in my coat pocket and a headache that wouldn't let go. The letter hadn't been meant for me. It was addressed to family and friends of Eloise Holloway, postmarked from Velma's address, forwarded to a P.O. box I hadn't touched in months. I almost tossed it, but I opened it, just in case, and you are warmly invited to celebrate the 80th birthday of our beloved Eloise Holloway. Join us for a garden luncheon and family tribute. Beloved. That word stuck with me more than the rest. The sky that morning was overcast, not dramatic or ominous, just indifferent. Kind of like my family. I walked the few blocks to their house, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see it with my own eyes. Needed to know if it had all really happened, or if I had made it worse in my mind over the years. There it was. Same white siding, same wind chimes on the porch. But now the yard was littered with balloons, folding chairs, and people I hadn't seen since I was a child. Laughing, hugging, pouring lemonade like nothing in this world had ever gone wrong. I stood across the street for a while before crossing. A neighbor spotted me and waved. You lost, hun. Catering's around back. Before I could answer, another woman stepped forward, smiling politely. Oh, are you with the event staff? I looked at her, square in the face. No, I'm the ghost no one invited. She blinked. I walked past her, slow and steady. Garrett was sitting in a lawn chair by the rose bushes, holding court. People came by to shake his hand, to tell him what a strong man he was. I saw Wendell refill his lemonade. Velma was busy directing the playlist, making sure the string lights were just right. Not once did any of them look toward the street. I didn't walk into the yard. I didn't raise my voice or wave my arms. Instead, I stayed in the blind spot they built over decades, where I was safest and most dangerous. I drifted around to the back, staying on the outer path, careful not to step on the freshly mowed grass. On the patio was a slideshow playing on a rented projector. Childhood photos, mostly black and white. Velma in pigtails, Wendell holding a baseball glove, Garrett in his work uniform. No pictures of me. Not a single one. Not even the one from the Christmas I broke my wrist helping Mom carry firewood. Not the one where I stood next to the birthday cake they claimed I didn't need that year. I wasn't just forgotten. I had been cut out. I stared through the window for a long minute, letting the laughter from inside fill the air around me. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out the card. Simple, white, handwritten. Some things don't die. You just stopped mentioning them. I slipped it under a potted fern by the back steps. Then I turned and walked back the way I came. Not because it hurt too much to stay, but because they didn't earn the right to see how much it still hurt. As I walked away, a man at the edge of the yard caught my eye. He squinted, then tilted his head. Wait, Marjorie? I didn't answer. He called after me again, louder this time. I kept walking. I reached the sidewalk, exhaled through my nose, and adjusted the strap of my purse. It was heavier than when I arrived somehow. Maybe that's what truth does. It weighs more when it's carried alone. By the time I reached the corner, the music faded behind me. A cover of You Are My Sunshine played on acoustic guitar. I hadn't heard that song since Eloise hummed it while packing my bag the night she told me I was too much for their life. It didn't make me nostalgic. It made me tired. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I just left and smiled, knowing they'd find the card after the cake was cut. The next morning, I caught the early bus back to Omaha. My body stayed upright, but my mind wandered in places I hadn't let it touch for years. Every time the tires hummed against the highway, it felt like a stitch pulling loose in a memory I hadn't sewn shut properly. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I stopped by the corner diner across from the Greyhound station. Coffee there tasted like burnt regret, but the server always remembered my name, and that kind of consistency was rare currency in my world. Back at my room above the boarding house, there was a stack of mail waiting inside the door. Junk mostly, coupons, a dentist flyer, a postcard from some church I'd never joined. But one envelope stood out. No return address. The handwriting was stiff, like it came from someone who didn't write much anymore. Inside was a short note. I kept this. I didn't know if you'd want it. Florence Maddox. Tucked behind the note was a scan of a document. Yellowed, stamped, signed in two hands, I recognized immediately. Garrett Holloway, Eloise Granger Holloway. Parental consent form. Termination of guardianship. Legal custody transferred to the state of Iowa. I held the page closer, my eyes scanning every detail. There was a handwritten receipt attached. Amount disbursed, $4,200. Below it, the date, just 5 days before the deed transfer on their new house. They didn't just let me go. They sold me. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while, letting the room go quiet around me. The radiator knocked. A siren echoed down the block. But all I could hear was Eloise's voice that night by the door. It's better not to get attached. I thought I was the problem. The high-maintenance child. Too sensitive, too much. Turns out I was just inconvenient and profitable. Later that afternoon, I went to the public library. I asked to use the archive computer and pulled up county records. It took less than 10 minutes to find it. A second mortgage issued to Garrett Holloway 6 days after my placement. The number matched. There it was in black and white. I wasn't unwanted. I was liquidated. That night, lying in bed with the lights off, I stared at the ceiling, remembering the bunk beds at the group home. Some girls cried themselves to sleep. Some got care packages. I never got either. I just folded into myself and learned to take up less space. It made me less of a target. I used to believe they gave me up because they didn't know what else to do, that maybe they were desperate, overwhelmed, afraid. But the truth was much simpler. They chose comfort over me, and for the first time in years, I wasn't crushed by that realization. I was clear-headed. The next morning, I dressed deliberately. Slacks, button-down shirt, pulled my hair back. No emotion, no softness. I took the train to the legal district and spent 3 hours at the law library. Downloaded every precedent I could find on post-placement fraud, financial benefit tied to wardship transfers, and violations of state subsidy disclosures. I took notes, bookmarked files, highlighted language, statute by statute. The librarian leaned over once and asked, "You working on a case?" I looked her in the eye. "Not yet, but I'm getting ready." That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror with the file from Florence in one hand and a notepad in the other. "I thought they were just done with me," I whispered to my own reflection. But they weren't. They cashed in on me. I tore the page from my notepad and wrote one sentence across it. They monetized my silence. Then I flipped it over and added, "Let's see how much noise I can make." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But something inside me shifted, just slightly enough to tip the scales back in my favor. And in that record, she wouldn't need to raise her voice, only show the receipt. The invitation to the will reading came through email, impersonal, like a subscription renewal notice. The sender was the family attorney's office. Subject line, "Reading of estate, Eloise Holloway." The date and time were firm. No condolences, just a note saying I was named as a legal party with interest. I showed up 10 minutes early, not to prove a point, just because I didn't want anyone saying I came in late looking for attention. The firm was downtown, a bland office building with a single potted plant by the elevator that hadn't been watered in weeks. When I entered the conference room, they were already seated. Velma, with her blazer buttoned too tight, pretended to check her phone. Wendell offered me a brief nod, the kind you'd give someone you sort of recognized from the DMV. Garrett sat hunched at the far end of the table, hands folded, eyes cloudy. The attorney cleared his throat and opened a manila folder. No preamble, no acknowledgement that I hadn't seen any of them in decades. Just the facts. To my daughter Velma and my son Wendell, I leave the estate, including the primary residence and remaining financial assets. To Marjorie Blythe, formerly under our guardianship until 1979, no provision shall be made. There it was. Not just rejection, legal erasure, no gasp, no apology, no confusion. Just paper, printed and signed. I wasn't a person to them. I was a clause. Velma looked toward the window. Garrett exhaled, like he was relieved it was done. Wendell dropped his gaze to his lap. No one said my name. Afterward, as everyone rose to leave, Lorraine lingered by the door. She looked unsure, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Finally, she caught up to me as I was zipping my coat. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly. I turned toward her, waiting. "Were you adopted or something?" I didn't flinch. "No," I said. "I was returned." Her mouth opened like she wanted to respond, but nothing came out. She looked away, and in that silence, I saw it. The beginning of doubt. The question she hadn't been allowed to ask until now. Maybe it was the first time she realized adults don't always tell the truth. I stepped past her without another word. Later that week, I sat in my apartment and wrote a letter to the firm. Short, precise. I do not contest the contents of the will. I do, however, reserve the right to publicly correct any omissions, factual or otherwise, through any legal or journalistic means I deem appropriate. I mailed it certified. 3 days later, Velma called. "I don't understand what you think this is going to accomplish," she snapped. "It's not like you were ever really part of this family." I paused, holding the phone away from my ear for a second to breathe. Then, calmly, "That's exactly the part I plan to clarify. For anyone else who's ever wondered." "You're embarrassing yourself," she hissed. I let that sit. "No, I'm just done letting you rewrite the past like I never existed. You always had a flair for the dramatic, and you always had a knack for pretending things were clean when they were just hidden." She hung up. That night, I retrieved the file from Florence, the parental surrender form, the payout stub, the faded date stamps. I slid them into a folder labeled Narrative Control. I didn't need to scream. I just needed to keep the facts straight. People like Velma thrived in silence, in quiet edits and missing photos. But I didn't owe her the comfort of being forgotten anymore. The truth doesn't need to be loud. It only needs to outlast the lie. So she decided to make her truth permanent, even if no one asked for it. 2 mornings after the letter to Velma was sent, I got a call from the hospital. "Mrs. Holloway's condition is declining," the nurse said. "We were told you were listed as emergency contact, since no one else is available." I didn't ask why I was the fallback. I already knew. They only remembered me when something needed signing. It was cloudy when I pulled into the hospital's rear parking lot. The kind of day where light can't decide if it wants to stay or go. I checked in, walked the familiar halls, and followed the quiet beeping toward the palliative wing. Eloise was alone. No flowers, no framed photos. Just her and the sound of machines doing what her body could no longer manage on its own. She turned her head slightly when I entered. Her eyes didn't widen. No surprise. Just the tired recognition of someone who knew the end wasn't far. "You came," she whispered, as though that fact carried weight. "I was called," I replied, pulling the chair closer. I didn't reach for her hand. She didn't offer it. After a long silence, she asked, "Did it hurt that much?" I blinked, unsure if she meant my absence or her own choices. Eloise sighed. "I did what I thought was best. For the others." I kept my voice steady. "And for me?" She didn't answer, just turned her face toward the ceiling tiles, like she might find her justification hidden up there. For 10 minutes, we sat with nothing between us but a history we never said aloud. Then she drifted off. A nurse entered softly. "She wanted you to have this," she said, handing me a small metal tin. "Told me it was important. Said you'd know what to do with it." I didn't open it right away. I waited until I was outside, sitting in my car, hands still shaking despite the stillness of the moment. Inside was a folded birth certificate, creased, weathered. Beneath it, the surrender form again, only this time with a signature that looked shakier than the version I'd already seen. And under that, a letter. Unsent. Addressed to me. The paper had browned at the edges. The handwriting wobbled, like it had been written through tears. Or tremors. "You cried just like I did when I was young. I couldn't watch it again. It brought too much back. I wish you could understand that." That was it. No apology, no, I was wrong. Just one woman's attempt to justify another girl's pain through the mirror of her own. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the tin. Not because I forgave her, but because some things are too heavy to hold and too cruel to throw away. That afternoon, I drove out to the storage unit I hadn't visited in years. It was still there, tucked behind a strip mall and a discount tire place, smelling faintly of old insulation and rubber. Inside, I unlocked a plastic container labeled Keep. Court records, medical papers, faded Polaroids with me cropped out or scribbled over, tax filings that never listed me as a dependent past 79. I set the tin gently in the center and closed the lid. Then I placed it inside a fireproof metal box I bought after my divorce. On the outside, a label I printed that morning. Truth, not for court, for history. If they had wanted to bury me, they should have destroyed the paperwork. As I locked the unit and walked back to my car, I didn't feel triumphant, just settled. Like some invisible piece had clicked into place, not because the past was fixed, but because I'd finally drawn the border around it myself. People think closure is about forgiveness. It isn't. It's about ownership, and for the first time in my life, I owned the story. Even the parts that broke me. I didn't tell anyone I left that storage unit. I just drove. No music, no phone calls. I let the silence hold space around me. By the time I reached my apartment, the sun had dipped low behind the buildings, throwing long shadows across the street. I was putting my keys down when the phone rang, the kind of ring that somehow sounded urgent before I even looked at the screen. It was Lorraine. Her voice cracked before she finished the first sentence. "It's Grandpa. He collapsed. The ambulance took him to County General." "Where's Velma?" I asked, already reaching for my coat. "She flew to Portland for some conference. Wendell said he doesn't want to get involved." Of course he didn't. "What do they need from me?" I said, though I already knew. "They need someone to sign the paperwork, for next steps. And you're the only one legally eligible now." I didn't answer, not right away. "It's just, he keeps asking for someone. I think he's scared." I closed my eyes. Of course it came back to me. The one they filed away. I hung up gently and slid my bag onto my shoulder, already thinking through what I'd need. I wasn't going there for comfort. I was going because someone had to show up, just like no one had for me. By the time I arrived, the hospital halls smelled like lemon cleaner and resignation. Nurses nodded politely. One of them guided me through double doors into a smaller unit where the lights were dimmed and the voices hushed. Garrett was in a recliner, hooked to monitors, eyes closed. His chest rose and fell in uneven patterns. He looked smaller than I remembered. Less like the man who once told me, "Quiet girls get kept longer," and more like a shell waiting to be handled. A nurse appeared with a clipboard. "You're Ms. Blythe?" I nodded. "You're listed as the only adult child not formally waived of medical proxy. We need consent to proceed with care options, long-term planning." She handed me a pen. Funny, how the weight of a signature could suddenly flip a lifetime upside down. I signed. The nurse gave me a look, soft but measured. "He may not have much time." "He's had more than enough," I said, setting the clipboard down. I walked out without looking back. The next morning, I met with Tamsin Greer in her downtown office. She'd been my quiet advisor for years, someone who never pried, only listened and acted when asked. I handed her a stack of files, photocopies of the custody transfer, state subsidy breakdowns, timeline overlays of the second mortgage. She flipped through the pages, eyes sharp. "You're not doing this to save him, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm doing it so the system has to look at what they let him do. To me, and probably others." She nodded slowly. "You don't have to provide care." "I know," I said, "but I can control what happens next." She tapped a few keys on her laptop, then looked up. "If we file for temporary guardianship, we can trigger a review of his finances, of his ethics as a past guardian." "And Velma? She won't be happy." I let out a quiet breath. That's not my concern. 3 days later, we filed. Court records updated. Judge approved temporary oversight. A financial review was ordered. Quietly, but officially. Velma and Wendell were served notices. The calls came within hours. Velma's voice was sharp, nearly shrill. "What are you trying to do, Marjorie? He's dying." "No," I said calmly. "He's finally being held accountable. You're dragging this family through the mud. You already buried me in it. I'm just making sure someone checks the foundation." She cursed, then hung up. I didn't feel satisfied, but I felt even. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote in the same corner I had written years ago. "They filed me away. I filed them back." Not out of spite, but because no one should be forced to disappear quietly, and the silence was about to collapse under the weight of everything they'd buried. The local newsletter came out every other Tuesday. I hadn't subscribed in years, but somehow a copy found its way into my mailbox that morning. Folded neatly, like it hadn't been tampered with. It had no name on the byline, but the title stood out like a bruise on pale skin. "The Daughter Who Disappeared." The story didn't mention me by name. It didn't have to. The timeline was clear: 1979, the financial transaction, the quiet removal of a child under the guise of what's best for the family. The closing line read, "Some people were buried alive, not to die, but to be forgotten." The phones in that house must have lit up like Christmas. I didn't write it, but I knew who did. A former social worker's niece, now a journalist, had reached out a few months ago asking vague questions about long-closed guardianship cases. I gave her nothing, but maybe the paper trail spoke louder than I ever could. By midday, people were whispering at the grocery store. I caught a woman near the apples muttering, "You think it's about the Holloways?" The man beside her didn't answer, just shook his head slowly, like he didn't want to be caught saying what he already knew. 3 days later, I was invited, unofficially, to the church service honoring Eloise. I wasn't sure why I went. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the sick need to witness how they'd package her legacy now that she wasn't around to defend it. The foyer was decorated with soft lavender cloth, candles in glass vases, and a folding table covered with framed photographs. A slideshow ran silently in the background. I stood at the edge of the room until I spotted it. The photo. It was from 1980. Supposed to be the last full family picture before Velma's college graduation. Garrett sat in the middle, Velma on one side, Wendell on the other. There was a gap, noticeable, awkward. And then I saw it. A jagged edge, where a face had been cut out, literally removed with scissors. No digital editing, no Photoshop, just old-school erasure with intent. They hadn't even replaced me with someone. They just edited me out. I walked closer. A few people stepped aside, murmuring. No one stopped me. I stared at that picture and didn't blink. If they erased me from their past, I said out loud, not caring who heard, I'll write myself into their future. I didn't touch the photo. I didn't tear it or frame it. I just took a picture with my phone and walked away. That was the evidence. That was enough. Later that evening, while I was finishing dishes, the phone rang. Velma. I let it ring twice before answering. "What did you do?" she barked. Her voice was taut, brittle, like a rubber band stretched too far. "I didn't do anything," I said, drying my hands on a dish towel. "But it sounds like the truth finally did." "This is harassment. You think you can just drag this family through the mud with these lies?" "Velma, if it's a lie, why does it hurt so much?" There was silence on her end, the kind that only follows being cornered. "You think you're clever," she spat, "but you're just bitter." "Maybe," I said evenly, "but I've got paperwork to back up every word. You can sue over slander, Velma, but not over the truth." She cursed and hung up. I didn't flinch. Instead, I sat down and wrote in my notebook. Again, same black pen, same top right corner. They thought silence protected them, but now silence speaks louder than I ever could. Let them scramble. Let them make calls. Let them spin a story. The thing about silence is, once it cracks, it echoes. But when a door closes on the past, sometimes a window opens towards something softer. The check cleared on a Tuesday. It wasn't flashy. No announcement. No parade. Just a quiet confirmation from the title office that the house at 204 Briar Lane, the same one my parents bought after signing me away, was now legally mine. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't need to. A week later, I met Anihi Delgado outside the front porch. She was holding a toddler on her hip, her other hand resting protectively on the shoulder of a shy boy with curls. Her eyes darted toward the front window, then back to me. "I'm not sure what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," I told her, sliding the key across the porch railing. "It's yours, $1 a month, no catches." She blinked, unsure if I was joking. "I don't want it to be a tomb," I added, watching her son lean toward the flower bed. "I want it to be a home again." She hesitated for just a moment before accepting the key, her fingers trembling slightly. I nodded once, stepped off the porch, and didn't look back. I hadn't walked past that mailbox in years. And now Not only had I bought the house they funded with my disappearance, I'd given it to someone who reminded me of the version of myself I never got to be. Hopeful, fragile, still believing a house could keep you safe. That Friday, I was sitting on my porch, sipping weak tea, when the nurse rolled Garrett up to the edge of my walkway. His chair clicked against the uneven pavement, wheels squeaking softly. He didn't recognize me at first. Then, slowly, something registered. His eyes narrowed. Not with anger, but with a searching sort of fatigue. "You live across from your own father," he said, "and won't even come say hello?" I didn't shift, just placed my cup down and answered. "I tried to once. No one listened." He stared at me. "I learned silence speaks louder here," I added. He looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly in his lap. No arguments, no excuses, just stillness. A moment passed where I thought he might ask to come in. He didn't. Instead, his chin began to quiver. Tears formed at the corners of his eyes, but never fell. I stayed seated. He waited. I didn't invite him. He didn't beg. And when the nurse began to wheel him back down the driveway, I stood slowly, walked to the door, and closed it gently behind me. Not with malice, not with rage, just closure. The next morning, I stepped out onto the porch and saw Anahi and her son planting tulip bulbs along the edge of the yard. She smiled when she saw me, brushing hair from her face with dirt-smudged fingers. The boy waved. I waved back. A few minutes later, Lorraine walked up the sidewalk, holding a manila envelope. She paused at my gate, then slipped it into my mailbox without saying a word. I waited until she disappeared around the corner before opening it. Inside was a letter. "You didn't just reclaim your story, you rewrote ours too." No signature, but I knew the handwriting. I stood there for a long time, envelope in hand, sun warming my face. Then I walked back inside, unlocked the fireproof box, and placed it alongside the old court records, letters, photos, and the worn-out tin from the hospital. I closed the lid with both hands. "It's not about justice anymore," I whispered. "It's about ending the cycle." And I meant it. The lid clicked shut, soft but final. It was early evening by then, the kind of time when the sky couldn't decide whether it wanted to hold on to the sun or let it go. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the letter one more time before placing it under the stack of envelopes beside the fruit bowl. No return address, no name, but I knew it was Lorraine. Her handwriting carried the kind of weight that comes when a young person tries to be careful with their words, not out of fear, but out of hope. "You didn't just reclaim your story, you rewrote ours too." There was more on the back, smaller script, like she'd written it without planning to, as if the truth just kept spilling out. "They raised us to believe pain was best ignored, that pretending meant healing. You made it real. That's why I believe you. If no one ever apologized, I'm sorry. Not for what happened, but for not realizing it sooner." I folded the letter and sat with it resting in my lap. I didn't cry. There was no dramatic music playing in my head, no swelling of emotions. Just a quiet recognition of something I hadn't even known I was waiting to hear. An acknowledgement that didn't come with excuses, no justifications, no signature trying to validate itself, only the kind of apology that lands when it has no reason to. And that's why it matters. The following Tuesday, I stopped by the community center just after lunch. Miss Helen, the receptionist with the southern drawl and quick hands, greeted me with her usual smile. "You here for the craft fair?" she asked. "Not today," I said, holding out a manila folder. She looked at it, then at me. "You need a copy machine?" "No, I'm here to donate something." I asked to speak to the director. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from a man who had probably spent his life listening to other people's broken things. I handed him the folder. Inside were my updated estate papers and a check for $50,000. "I'd like to set up a grant," I said, "for women who've been discarded, who were called difficult, dramatic, too much, or not enough." He flipped through the document slowly. "What would you like it called?" "The Blythe Grant, for women discarded but not done." He smiled, but didn't say anything. I added, "This isn't about rewriting history. It's about making sure the next woman doesn't drown in it." As I stood to leave, I caught the eye of a young woman in the lobby. She had a stroller with a sleeping infant and a backpack that looked like it had survived one too many winters. Our eyes met for only a second, but she nodded. I nodded back. No words exchanged. None needed. Later that week, on a bright Saturday morning, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea. The house across the street, mine once, then theirs, now Anahi's, looked alive again. The tulips were blooming along the fence. The front windows were open. I could hear soft laughter coming from inside. Lorraine showed up just after 10. She didn't text. She never did. She just started appearing more and more, like water seeping through a cracked foundation, not to destroy, but to soften. She sat beside me, her legs pulled up under her. We didn't talk for a while. Eventually, she asked, "Do you ever wonder what it might have been like if they'd made a different choice?" I took a long sip before answering. "No," I said. "I wonder who I would have become if I'd waited for them to." She didn't say anything back, just reached down and plucked a petal from a tulip near her foot. A few minutes passed. Then, softly, she said, "You're not a burden, Aunt Marjorie." I looked out at the garden, where things had started to grow again. "Not anymore," I said. "Not to me." We sat in the silence, not needing to fill it. And I realized then that some things we don't repair. Not because we can't, but because we've learned how to live differently without them. She wasn't healed, she wasn't whole, but she was finally her own. Before we close this chapter, let me share something with you. Just one thought, from someone who has carried silence longer than most people carry names. I used to believe that healing meant things going back to how they were. That one day, someone would say sorry, and all the broken pieces would fit together again like a puzzle. But now I know, healing isn't about fixing what happened, it's about owning it, so it no longer owns you. Sometimes the justice we seek won't come from courtrooms or apologies. It will come from choosing not to pass the same wound to someone else. Sometimes the win is not revenge, it's peace. If you've ever felt like the one they forgot, the one left out of the photo, the will, or even the dinner table, this story is for you. You are not invisible. You were never the burden. And your silence? It deserves to be broken in your own way, in your own time. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever been erased from your own story, by your family, by your history, or by someone who said they loved you? If so, drop a 1 in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your story, your thoughts, or even your silence, because here, you matter. And if you didn't like the video, tell me why. I'm listening. Maybe someone else needs to hear your version too. If this story touched you, helped you breathe a little deeper, or made you feel just a bit more seen, please consider subscribing to the channel. There's more to come, more voices, more stories, more truth. Click that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next. Because around here, the stories don't just get told, they get reclaimed,